The next topic we're going to speak about is one which is, of course, some would say at times one of the most controversial aspects of the smart grid, which is the issue of authorization, privacy, and security. So privacy is a big deal. How many people know that privacy is a big deal these days? Right? So, you know, where I live, California, we've got, we've got a privacy law on the books, and I guess it's led to other laws, and so the issue of data privacy and security is a hot and often controversial topic, and the discussions on privacy and security are often separate discussions within the smart grid ecosystem, but they are extremely closely related. And to talk about this, we have Megan Hertzler, who's the Director of Data Privacy from Excel Energy Services, and Sandy Basic, who's a Principal Consultant from Internex. You know, Boris, are you here? Boris Sagalis, you can come here and join these people on stage. Boris Sagalis is with the InfoLaw Group, and the reason I'm bringing him up on stage is because at the recent American Bar Association Information Security meeting, I'm a member of the Information Security Committee, and I'm not a lawyer, you know, so no daggers, please. I mentioned the issue of smart grid privacy and security, and he immediately took the ball and ran with it and created an smart grid privacy and security working group within the American Bar Association, which there has been an enormous interest in all of a sudden. So, you know, I said, well, come to my conference and, you know, I'll bring you up on stage and maybe you can talk about it briefly. And moderating this panel, we have Chris Cotting with Think Smart Grid. And of course, Chris has done quite a bit of work with the Ohio Public Utility Commission and also quite a bit of work in the NIST Privacy Group. So, thank you, Chris, and take it away.
Thanks, Mike. You know, in the last panel session, Mike compared the standards processes to the food service industry and noted that in the food service, you know, when people are there, you make food. Well, that's a pretty good comparison, but I have to say in the defense of the folks working on smart grid standards, based on that comparison, smart grid is the iron chef of standard setting processes. You don't know what you're going to have to work with. You don't have enough time to do it. And when you're done, people who weren't necessarily involved in the process will sit back and judge the result. Thank you, Darren. Well, I'm very pleased to have these folks, and very pleased to meet you, Boris, to talk about privacy and the smart grid. And I'm going to kind of open things up with a very, very broad question, possibly the most broad and probably the key question. How do we define privacy? What are we talking about here? I'll just kind of toss that out to the panel, and we'll see what happens from there.
Well, I'll give a start. I think that, you know, from our perspective, you know, as a utility, meters have been on the outside of houses. The little numbers spin. Anyone who wanted to go up and look at them could do so. In fact, there was absolutely no security on it whatsoever. And this, you know, has been going on for 100 years. And now, with the idea of being able to read the meter more frequently, we have unique issues that were never present when we put meters on the outside of house and anyone could go up and read it. And the privacy concerns there are things, frankly, that I think as an industry we are trying to get our arms around. Is this privacy in the sense of being, for lack of a better term, just sort of plain vanilla confidential? Is this privacy in the sense of what we may have looked at in the context of social security numbers and things that can be used for identity theft and fraud? Or is it something in the middle? And that really does matter, because I think the level of security, the type of access, the kind of validation you do of that access all can be affected based on how private is it. And I don't know that anyone has really answered that question yet of how private is the data, what are the risks that we're trying to mitigate here, and what are the adequate steps to take to mitigate those risks.
And to add on to what Megan is saying, we also have our personal behaviors. Within our house, what electronics we turn on, the TV. If you're like me, I have to have my TV going all night for white noise. My neighbors look at my house and say, Sandy's not home, yet I'm home. I just, don't turn on that many lights. We also have the personal communication. So as Megan was talking about that personal information, how much of that communication should be private, personal versus public, or owned by somebody else?
So I think that if you look at the big picture, what privacy is, I think first, in the broadest sense, it can be interpreted as a right to be left alone. But when it comes to information privacy, I think that we're really talking about how third parties can use information about individuals and under what circumstances. And it's sort of in the broader scope, what are individuals entitled to know and what choices individuals are entitled to have when others use their information. So what notice do you get when somebody gets your information, uses your information? What choices do you have? Will you have somebody tracking your behavior? Do you have a choice not to have that tracking? Do you have a choice not to receive marketing communications? So that's all goes into the privacy of your information.
Well, that's a very good point, and it's also a very good transition to my next question. So thank you very much for that. I did have one thing, though, Megan. You were talking about how traditionally the meter, information coming from the meter was available for anybody who walked up to the house. Now, as I understand it, the issue of privacy as a legal entity had a lot to do with control of your physical space. So to a certain extent, that whole walk up to the meter and read it issue is kind of dealt with as a should they be in your physical space question, isn't it?
Well, I think so. I mean, for one thing, let's be clear. When you read someone's usage frequently, you start to be able to see things within the home that wouldn't be apparent to someone who walked up to your meter and perhaps took a reading, let's say even once a day. This is something that I think evokes the privacy concern, because now you have a situation where, incidental to the actual purpose of the collection of the data, the utility could make some very intelligent guesses as to how many people are in the home, whether they use a stovetop versus a microwave, how, when are people awake, when are they asleep, what are the fun things they have plugged into the wall, do they have a herbology project in the basement,
Nicely put.
These are things that may not be immediately apparent from the exterior of the home, but frankly, the utility now is in a better position to understand than if someone wiretapped your phone.
Okay. Now, the thing that, did you have something on that, Boris?
Well, just to say that it's not just utilities who will have access to that information, but you'll have third parties that are operating the home area network that will have access to that same information. And as Megan noted, there are estimates, and I think it's a low number, that the data analytics market, smart grid data analytics market, will be worth over $4 billion by 2015. And this is the sort of information that will be analyzed to find out more about people through the smart grid and to target advertising, profile, and do all kinds of things. And
let's be clear, this is not Facebook. The fact that this information or the conclusions you can draw from this information are out there is not because someone decided to update their status and say, hey, I have a herbology project in the basement. This is information that's going to be collected for a number of purposes and now can be used in a way that the individual didn't put out there deliberately with that purpose. Whether people truly understand how Facebook works or not, I leave to another day.
Yeah.
Just to add on, as Boris was talking about third parties, many third-party apps are delivered by a vendor. They are not necessarily connected with the utility, so a utility may not know what the homeowner has as a gateway to give to that app. So many times these third parties and the utilities don't know who has what data or what that consumer has given permission to use.
And just to quickly add to that, that's another very good point, because the question is not who will even know which third parties have access to that information. There was some recent research that showed that 30 of the top 50 website owners didn't have control over third parties that were getting information, tracking information on those sites, because they participate in advertising networks, for example, and the relationships are so complex that you lose control over that. And the same thing could potentially happen with the smart grid, where you have all kinds of third parties having access to that home area network, and utility providing additional information to those third parties, and possibly having liability for disclosing data. I mean, it's really limitless. Right. What do you think, Megan, about that?
We could talk about liability for a very long time.
A very, very long time. I did want to kind of tee up one thing. I know, Megan, you're familiar with it. There was a recent Colorado rulemaking on third-party data access. Could you kind of give us some background on that?
Certainly. Colorado, for those of you who don't know, is the state where Xcel Energy has its current Smart Grid City project located there. And I think for that reason, there's been a lot of interest, both at the legislative level as well as the Colorado PUC level, as to all the issues, whether they be security or privacy or anything that's sort of incident to a project like that in the state. The Colorado legislature formed the Colorado Smart Grid Task Force about 9 months ago. The task force was to make recommendations on security and privacy to the legislature. They did that in January. Concurrent to that, not necessarily connected, the Colorado PUC did a notice of rulemaking in December. The initial draft rules were fairly restrictive on the utility's ability to be able to use information without getting the customer's consent. To kind of outline some of those terms, it was basically laid out that except for billing, the utility could not use customer-specific energy usage data without obtaining the customer's consent, and that consent would have to be renewed annually. So from my perspective, you take that to a nuts and bolts level. My load research, my rate design, my environmental compliance tracking, DSM, all of that I would be subject to probably significant gaps as the customer either did not respond, and non-response would be taken as denial, or outright denied access. We had some concerns about a construct like that. We went back to the PUC with comments that said, hey, you're going to shut us down. We understand privacy is a critical concern. We agree with you. But let's look at this in a way that allows the utility to still be able to act in its traditional regulated manner, which is completely overseen by the PUC. Those rules now are in the process of we're trying to work towards consensus rulemaking. We have had 7 workshops. These are long, very vigorously debated workshops. I think we will actually reach consensus on how we treat customer-specific information with regard to access, with regard to consent, and what needs to occur in order to have that consent be informed and valid. I am less optimistic about the issues around aggregated data and what is truly aggregated. What are the obligations of the utility to provide access to aggregated data to third parties? Is it to anyone who asks? Is that real-time access? Or is that a suite of data products that the utility will put into its tariff? And let's not hold our breath any longer. Who pays? Because if the utility is now going to get into the business of a data services provider, we will have to upgrade systems, we will have to put in technology, we'll have to do many things that will cost money. And there's quite a bit of debate over whether that should be borne by our customers or by the cost causer. And so, and those two are not necessarily the same. So I think it's a stay tuned. We had a update hearing with the Colorado PUC chair, who is leading the rulemaking effort at this point. He has basically said we will submit to him rules by the 24th of this month, whether they are fully consensus or they are majority rules, And then parties will have an opportunity to submit written comments on those rules with the full commission hearing them on April 7th.
Oh. Well, just sort of my own perspective on that, having been with the Ohio PUC until fairly recently, the Ohio Commission has a similar process for third-party data access and other privacy rules that's just now initiating. I believe the first round of comments either were just due or are coming due in the next couple of days.